Welcome back to Gibbo MMA, and I'm sure you've heard the new UFC deal signing with Paramount Plus with the huge $7.7 billion deal over, what was it, 7 years. So $1.1 billion a year essentially for the broadcast rights deal for the UFC with exclusive to Paramount Plus and CBS. But that is only in the US. What about everywhere else in the world? What does that mean for us MMA fans in Australia, in the UK, in Europe, um, in Africa? Where are we? What does it mean for us? Because they're saying the pay-per-view era is dead. There are no more pay-per-views, but coming from Australia, being in Australia and looking more into it, it seems like pay-per-views are still alive. And what to think of that is, kind of torn. Because originally I thought, because we have Paramount Plus in Australia. So when I first heard the news and reacted to it, I just assumed we were going to be on the same sort of deal and watch it on Paramount Plus, no more pay-per-views. But as this deal slowly unravels, it's just exclusive to US at the moment with the streaming service. But in Australia, it's business as usual because we have it here on Main Event and KO, the UFC. So at the moment, it's just business as usual. So I'll quickly remind you of the deal. So UFC signed a $7.7 billion over 7 years with Paramount Plus and CBS. 13 numbered events, so that'll probably be like the title fights and 30 fight nights a year. So 43 events a year. And then around four marquee events will be simulcast broadcast free to air on CBS in America. So probably like the International Fight Weeks, UFC White House, and just some other big, if they have a big stack card that they decide to simulcast on free to air. But yeah, like first hearing, I was like, yes, no more pay-per-views. But in Australia here, we watch it on KO, and for the pay-per-views, it's ordered through Main Event, owned by Fox. And what's interesting is Foxtel just got bought by DAZN earlier this year for $3.4 billion. So they're currently merging. So Fox and DAZN will be merged. So it's going to be interesting what that looks like in the future when UFC will be with Paramount Plus and CBS, a competitor essentially. Um, because earlier this year in January, Foxtel announced they've reached a new multi-year agreement for Main Event to be the exclusive home of pay-per-views for the UFC pay-per-views in Australia. And additionally, in February last year, UFC confirmed that it extended its agreement with ESPN Australia to broadcast all fight night events and pay-per-view prelims. So currently it looks like Australia is locked up in the pay-per-view model still. If you're an Australian fan or a fan, I'm not sure what it's going to be like in Europe and whatnot. I don't know if it's with TNT Sports or something. If you're an international fan in the UFC, let me know your thoughts around this. Let me know if you have any more information about this deal and how we're going to watch this because, yeah, the whole headline pay-per-views era's gone, but, in the US, yeah, but it doesn't look like internationally, pay-per-views may still be going. And so, and with those deals, those multi-year deals Australia made, those end dates for both those deals weren't made publicly. So we don't know when the pay-per-view model will end. And currently, Paramount Plus, they will just have to wait till those international rights become open to negotiate. And I got a feeling because it starts in 2026. I got a feeling like surely, because we have Paramount Plus in Australia. I've used it. We have the A League and women's soccer streamed on it, and I don't use Paramount anymore, but I will definitely get it if UFC's on it. And I'm sure they will want to dive into the Australian market. Like the amount of Australian UFC fans there are, I'm sure Paramount will definitely want to dive more into our market here and get more subscribers, because they're already established here. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. But now they're up against the pay-per-view main event, KO, and essentially Fox Sports and DAZN to have to compete for our market. And what's a big part of our culture here in Australia is watching sports. And where do we watch sports a lot outside of our house is to go down to the local pub, tavern, RSL. A lot of weekends, people spend their weekends there because we're a big gambling nation. And I'm just wondering, if you work at a pub, club, bar, restaurant that puts on live sports, what would you prefer? To have to pay the money to put pay-per-view events on, or just pay the licensing fee like you already pretty much do for Fox Sports and everything else, and just pay that for the streaming service to be able to put these events on? I don't know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword at the moment because a lot of pubs get foot traffic in when there's a UFC pay-per-view event on, because a lot of people don't want to pay. It's like $60 here to buy the pay-per-view, so they'll just go down to the pub or tavern to watch it. And that way, there's more foot traffic, people spending money. So yeah, all the economics behind that. But is the return on investment worth it for these taverns and pubs and RSLs to buy these pay-per-view events? Because just for a singular event, it's around that $2,000 mark, ballpark, plus or minus, just for a one event, to just to get the license to put on a UFC event. So I used to go to an RSL here in Australia, and I think it was sort of during COVID or just after, they just stopped purchasing the pay-per-view events. And I was like, because I rocked up there, and then I was like, oh, where's the UFC? And he's like, oh, no, we stopped buying it. It just wasn't worth it because there's just not enough people coming in here to watch it and then spending money. And I said, oh, like, how much does it cost you? And he said, yeah, a few $1,000s just for the day, just to put it on. So I'll be going to a tavern this Sunday to watch it, where they put it on and get a decent foot traffic. But those smaller establishments, and especially if there's not many UFC fans in that area, yeah, it's just not a great ROI to purchase a pay-per-view event, because they're already spending 2 to 4K a month just for the Foxtel cable live sports licensing, or ESPN. So like 2 to 4K a month just to be able to put on live sports all the time in their establishment. And because the residential subscription fee for like things like KO and all that is, like $30 to $40 a month. But private establishment, or like licensed establishments, can't use that type of subscription, because if they do, it's like an $860,000 fine if they get caught, using a residential subscription, which costs like $40 a month, and putting it up on their big screen TV for everyone to watch. They actually have to purchase like a licensing subscription fee, and that's can range, thousands of dollars a month. And I wonder if Paramount Plus would be a better option for these establishments. I'm not too sure how much it would cost for a licensing subscription to be able to put on the UFC events in like a bar. But I'd say the ROI would be a lot better. And yeah, if you work out one of these or you run one, comment or reach out, let me know. I might even this Sunday ask the guys where I go to what they think. Because yeah, it's pretty interesting because, in the US too, like I guess those people there, let me know if you, on pay-per-view events, you purely go there because you don't want to pay $80 or whatever. But yeah, it's, yeah, very, not huge ramifications, but just, yeah, for the Aussie fan base, because we've got Jack Della, welterweight champ, Alex Volkanovski, featherweight champ. We've got a lot more other guys on the rise. Like we've got Carlos Orberg headlining in UFC Perth, and it's a big market here. And yeah, I just wonder um, what the best thing moving forward is. Personally, the streaming would just be nice and simple. But yeah, any Aussie guys watching this, let me know your thoughts on the deal and how it affects us. If you want to see the pay-per-view continue or full streaming. But let's move on to what does this mean for the fighters? Okay. Because it's great. 7.7 billion over 7 years, 1.1 billion a year. And approximately, there's no direct figure, the UFC pays its fighters 16 to 18% of the revenue. And that was going off, I believe, the ESPN deal, which was around almost 500 mil a year, the UFC were getting from the previous deal. And if you look at the other major sporting organizations, leagues in the US, like NFL, NBA, and MLB, around half of their revenue goes to their players. And that's why you see those big like hundreds of $1 million contracts in the MLB, NBA, and NFL, hundreds of millions of dollars for those marquee players. And it's like, where's that for our top marquee fighters? They're not seeing that. And if there's ever a time now for these fighters, actually, before I get to that point, so the reason these players in these other leagues get this amount is because they unionize. They come together and they have like a players association essentially, and they can very much negotiate with the enterprise bargaining agreements to get more pay. Whereas in the fight business and in UFC, it's a free for all. It's solo. There's no one coming together. The only time they really came together was for that antitrust lawsuit where they got paid out almost $500 million in for fighter pay. And yeah, whereas still now they have no say or anything in this broadcast deal, and they don't have any say if their purses are gonna get bumped up. It's really just a free for all. Like they're on the bus jumping into tilted towers all solo, freaking hoping they get a fucking gun and freaking can just fight and survive to be able to make their way up and win that prize of the title and making money on the way. But yeah, they're really just playing solo Fortnite with their pay, and they're just hoping their managers or themselves can negotiate a better deal. And unless you're Conor McGregor and can win and promote well, like it's very hard to make a retirement and get generational wealth from the sport, whereas you can get that in the other sports, NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL. And yeah, like, and if we look at the broadcast rights deal from these other leagues, so NFL, $10 billion a year at the moment, and that's spread across, free-to-air networks and other streaming services. That's why you see those, big quarterbacks, Patty Mahomes, Joe Burrow, get those $100 million deals. NBA, $2.5 billion a year at the moment for their broadcast right deals. So, UFC's getting up there now with this deal. MLB, 1.5 billion. So the UFC are pretty much now matching the US America's game, baseball, MLB, and those MLB players get paid a shit ton. So if there's ever a time now for the fighters to somehow come together and form some sort of union or, really fight for their purses and pay is right now because the UFC has done so well because one of the biggest expenses in any sort of company business are the wages, and they've done super well to keep that bottom line really small and low cost. And I think it's time now because for the fighters to really push hard. Like, I wonder if there's going to be a strike, if there's going to be a fighter strike to try and get some, because the UFC are up here and the gap is still large. The fighters are sort of down here. If there's ever a time to bridge that gap with fighter pay, it is now. And I really want to see it. Like, it's hard being a fan of the UFC because it's like, you know, UFC do so well to be consistent, putting on great fights and all that, and having a consistent product. Super grateful because you don't see many other organizations doing that. But then also the dark side of, you know, seeing these fighters come on the Apex or whatever, come on and fight, and then they're back at work, that week. There was a fighter who just did the big Rampage Jackson powerbomb. He wins, gets a bonus, and then he's back a few days later selling cars. You don't see any of that in the other NFL and MLB guys going back to work after just playing a game at a local. Like Jeff Neal in an interview after one of his recent fights was working as a waiter at the time as well. And yeah, it's just, if it's ever clear as daylight now that there is some sort of exploitation of the fighters, I've done the numbers. I got the scientific calculator out, the tan cos, standard deviation, square root of x, and the numbers come out as fucked right now for these fighters. And if there's ever a time, like I'm saying, for these fighters to really come together and get what they deserve, it is now. So I'm hoping, the managers, whatever, because at the moment it's just up to the managers to do what's best for their fighters. Again, it's like Fortnite, solo play Fortnite at the moment for fighter pay. You got to start working team deathmatch, Call of Duty shit, jumping in and off the bus with your boys to try and get some sort of union or trying to get more rev share of this broadcast deal because they deserve it. Because UFC wouldn't be here without all those fighters. And if we look into the ESPN era, that's when it really took off in 2019. They signed with ESPN and then COVID hits. And it takes two to tango to do what they did. Yes, UFC stayed open and went to Abu Dhabi, Fight Island, figure it out. Dana White, hats off to you, much respect. But if it wasn't for those fighters flying across the world, leaving their families, especially in Australia and New Zealand, bit of bias here because every time you went somewhere, you had to do 2 weeks quarantine. So after Dan Hooker did that crazy fight with Dustin Poirier, he had to go sit in an apartment and do 2 weeks quarantine in New Zealand. And there's a video of him, kind of he wasn't even able to hug his daughter because there was a fence there. And it's just like, fighters, for UFC to be able to get this deal now, fighters had to sacrifice a lot themselves during COVID, getting on 14-hour flights. And then especially coming back to Australia, like Volkanovski, Adesanya, those guys pretty much carried the UFC pay-per-views during the COVID era. And because they did that, UFC have been able to grow and get this deal now. Like Volkan Adesanya, every time they had to go off and fight in the States or Abu Dhabi, they then had to come back and do 2 weeks quarantine. And, you got to, like, they've essentially been almost a small partner in the rise of the UFC to get this deal. So, like, they should be almost getting a cut. Like, when Conor McGregor was coming up and he was selling all those pay-per-views, and in the famous lines, I'm not here to take part, I'm here to take over. And then he I think it was when he beat Alvarez to become double champ, or when it was Aldo, he's in the press conference saying like, where's my piece of the pie? Like he's bringing all these numbers, like I should be a partner or whatever. And he was really the first guy to say that. And he sure did have every right to, because pretty much he's got like out of the top 10 pay-per-views, he's got like the top 8 pay-per-views in the UFC all time, and him and Floyd is second all time. I think Floyd Pacquiao holds the highest pay-per-view event. But again, let me know your thoughts. I've gone and got my head around this situation and what it means for us Aussie fans and somewhat internationals. UFC fans are just sitting back cruising, just get the subscription, you're sorted. But us international fans are still, freaking on the fence of like, are we staying with the pay-per-views? Because, it's not made public, the ESPN and main event deal here, when it will end. We're not sure. So I'm hoping Paramount, able to negotiate something here in Australia and be the exclusive streaming provider for UFC. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about all that. Got most of it out of the way. I'll be able to talk more about it in the UFC 319 preview. But yeah, do you agree with or have any suggestions on what the fighters should do? And if you're an Australian watching this or an international UFC fan, let me know your thoughts on it and what it means for your country, how you'll be watching it. And yeah, um, be sure to watch the Chimaev Duplessis breakdown and the UFC 319 preview that will come out. But had to jump on, give my 2 cents, let me know your thoughts. Have a good day.